Okay. All right. So yeah, welcome everyone to the DSA elections forum. I'll start with introductions of everyone. I'll just go in the order that I see everyone. I'll start first. I'll be your moderator for today's panel. My name is Jocelyn Pena. I use they, them pronouns. I am a member of Miami DSA, and I am the president of Florida International University YDSA, and I'm the communications co-chair for Reform and Revolution. So yeah, I'm very excited to be hosting or moderating this panel. And I'll start with Allie.
Hello, everyone. My name's Allie, she, her pronouns. I am currently the treasurer for Southern New Hampshire DSA. I am a former co-chair and former secretary of Southern New Hampshire DSA, as well as a former co-chair of Tidewater DSA and a former lead of eco-socialist work in Charlottesville DSA. I've also been sitting on the Queer Socialist Working Group, the national working group for queer people, and have been in leadership over there for 2 years. And I will be here on this debate representing Red Star Caucus.
Thank you. And then I'll have Stephen go next.
Hi, comrades. I'm Stephen Rainey, he, him. I'm a member of Marxist Unity Group. I helped found a YDSA chapter in the Deep South. I'm currently on YDSA's National Coordinating Committee and involved in work developing YDSA's political education and political platform or program.
And next I'll have Zev.
Hey everyone, I'm Zev. I use he, they pronouns. I'm from New York City DSA. I'm in Bread and Roses, and I'm co-chair of the For Our Rights Committee. And we recently authored and published our 2024 program, Workers Deserve More.
Thank you. Next I'll have Alex.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex M. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently the secretary of Seattle DSA. I'm a member of LSC. I'm a former union member of UAW 2865, who did a wildcat strike in 2019 that was well publicized for cost of living adjustment for graduate student workers. I'm an organizer former organizer with Raise a Wage Renton, a ballot initiative that DSA successfully passed in Renton to raise minimum wage. Currently involved in a number of different ballot initiative campaigns for public housing in Seattle. And last night I was on the line for Boeing workers in Renton.
Great. Thank you. Next I'll have Ben.
Hey comrades, Ben Davis, he, him from Metro DC DSA. I'll be representing Groundwork today. I've been active in DSA since 2017, in particular with our electoral work, and I also professionally do look at sort of political data, and I write about like how to measure DSA and our base like quantitatively and what that means.
Thank you. Next I'll have Grace.
Hi, my name is Grace Mauser. I'm in New York City DSA. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Socialist Majority Caucus. I have done a lot of my organizing in New York City with the Electoral Working Group in the city, and have worked in both paid and unpaid capacities, mostly unpaid, with the vast majority of our 11 elected socialists in office, and I have been doing that for, I guess, 5 years or so now. So excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you. And finally, we'll have Judith. Judith, we cannot hear you, or at least I can't, but it shows you're unmuted. No. Is it connected to like headphones or anything by any chance? Okay, cool. Judith will do intros in the first question, so no worries. Okay, so cool. We will get started with our first question. And I'll just make sure there's no one waiting in the waiting room. So yeah, our first question, it's going to be 25 minutes and we'll have about 3 minutes for each speaker. I have a 3-minute and 25-minute timer, so I'll try to just keep in mind of that time. If you want to set your own timer, that's fine, but I can let you know if people would prefer, if they have like 30 seconds left or so. And the first question, I can repeat it as many times as you'd like, but the first question is, what is your assessment of the 2024 elections? What challenges do working people face, and how should we respond to them? So our first speaker is from Libertarian Socialist Caucus, Alex.
Yeah, so we are still living in a pandemic, which not only resulted in a major death toll for our comrades, friends, and neighbors, but was also exploited by the capitalist class to steal billions, if not trillions of dollars from the working class. We're living under a record high economy that we're told, but we know that that record high economy is being enjoyed by the capitalists and not the workers. Workers are having to pay much more prices for basic goods and services. Workers are living under increasingly high rents. The cost of living is higher than it's ever been in our lifetimes. And everyone in the political class who's running for office from the perspective of the major party leadership is completely disconnected from the needs and wants of the working class. People are feeling increasingly disconnected from their politicians. Rightfully so, because their politicians don't respect their actual opinions on political issues. Gaza is currently being crushed under the weight of empire in a war that the United States continues to support in defiance of international law and against the wishes of its own people, as the majority of opinion in the United States is in favor of a ceasefire, which our politicians, the Biden administration, is not pushing for. So the question on how to approach the 2024 elections comes down to what extent is the impact of the election going to be felt by the working class? And I think in terms of the options that are most likely going to win the presidency, the working class is not going to find any kind of victor for their interests in who's being elected this year. It's either going to be an outright fascist who's promised to jail his political opponents and tighten the control of a authoritarian government in his favor, or a politician that, while giving lukewarm, tacit lip service to the interests of the working class, is fundamentally on the side of capital with the actual organizing interests, or sorry, the actual political interests that she represents. So if we are to have a role in this election, I don't think it's going to be with the options that we've been given through this two-party system. It's going to be through the options we create through ourselves, through our organizing. We need to be able to respond to the needs of people by directly engaging their issues on a meaningful level that they can feel, and not by voting for a politician who's basically going to be either continuing the status quo of imperial governance in the United States in favor of corporate interests, and ultimately not commit to any changes that's going to be felt by them on a reasonable level. Until we address people's issues directly through our own organizing, we're not going to achieve a result that people are going to turn to and think highly of.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is from Marxist Union Group, so I'll have Stephen unmute.
Yeah, so there's only so much speculation we can do when it comes to the challenges and concerns facing the working class, but what we can do concretely is look at the real struggles that are emerging around us in real time. Struggles like fights over the unlivable wages and hours that workers are subjected to. We've seen the militant union struggle since 2022 and the strike wave that year, the explosion of UAW militancy and their historic contract win in the strike against the big three automakers. We've seen struggles against police repression, like the historic struggle against Cop City in Atlanta and emerging similar ones in cop cities across the country. We've seen struggles over trans rights and bodily autonomy with DSA chapters and other organizations at the state level fighting for ballot initiatives and resisting the kind of the genocidal drive against trans people and the drive to restrict access to abortion. And most critically right now, we're seeing the struggle against the genocide in Palestine and our country's active participation in it, with one of the most historically significant protest movements since 2020 erupting in the streets with the uncommitted movement, with the student uprisings. And we're also seeing that same structure of the genocide in Palestine reflected here with the genocidal, xenophobic immigration policy of the Biden and Trump campaigns and Harris campaign. And that's one level of threat, the threat to survival, the survival of the working class. And I think there's another level of threat beyond that, which is, or a level of challenge beyond that, the lack of political representation the working class faces this year. The far right is obviously on the offensive on all of these issues, but then not only are the Democrats not putting up a fight, they're now on many of the same fronts, explicitly on the offensive as well. We had the Democrats effectively surrendering to Trump on immigration policy and adopting many of his policies since 2022. And the Dems have abandoned even minor climate concessions. They've now become the party of fracking and record oil production and are proud of this. They've become strike breakers, as we saw with the rail workers strike. They're the party of cop cities, building them not just in Atlanta, but in municipalities all over the country. And of course, at the DNC, we saw with the struggle of the uncommitted movement coming up against the hard limitations of the Democratic Party, with the blatant racism of denying even a loyal Democrat Palestinian a speaking slot on the stage, and the telegraphing of pro-war, pro-Israel messaging, pro-deportation messaging, all of this terrible right-wing demagoguery from the Harris campaign, the ostensible opposition to Trump. And as a result of all of that, there's a kind of historic alienation, I think, of the supposed base of the Democratic Party. We're seeing dramatic declines in support from Muslim American and Arab American voters. Youth are feeling disenfranchised. And there's kind of a sense of hopelessness, like we can only settle for the lesser of two evils, even if the difference between the two is becoming marginal. And we've seen this need to express itself through organized bodies of the working class. There are mass unions representing millions of workers have put forward the demand for an arms embargo. We saw UE, United Electrical Workers, just this past week, release a statement about the need for a new party of the working class, while also confronting the kind of hopelessness of needing to elect Harris, supposedly to defeat Trump. So how do we address this? We have to prove ourselves capable as DSA of becoming the political home that working people, alienated youth, racialized sections of the working class facing unique forms of oppression want and need. We can't feed into this kind of cycle of hopelessness and repeated defeat, which has led us to this point where the so-called lesser of two evils is now running on Trump's platform from 2016 for all intents and purposes. Yeah, that's the name of the game. It's becoming the political home for the alienated and disenfranchised working class.
Thank you. Next, we'll have a Socialist Majority Caucus. So that's Grace.
Great. Thank you. So we're facing an election between a moderate conservative and a fascist. No one's here to defend the Democrats, so I'm not gonna list all their crimes, but the reality that we're actually facing, right, is that we're in a two-party system and one of these people will actually become president. This is a political reality. We don't, as DSA, yet have the power to change that. Some in DSA, though I really think it's it's a tiny minority of DSA members and a minority of leftists want to maintain this reality, or ignore this reality rather, in order to maintain their own moral purity. They don't want to be complicit in our broken, unjust, immoral political system. And it is all those things. But there's really no such thing as not being complicit in this system. Like, we live on American land, we participate in capitalism, we pay taxes to the American government. So abstention from actual like voting in American state power is really just asceticism, liberal asceticism, really, and it's not an actual material resistance to capitalism or to the political system we exist in. So we're looking at a choice between liberal asceticism and socialist materialism. The point of politics, to me, and to I hope many of you, is not to make you feel like a good person. It's to win what you actually believe in and to try to make the world a better place for the working class. For democratic socialists, I think that in fact is democratic socialism, a more equal and democratic society where people share ownership of things and we use them together, like our workplaces and our government. So we'll talk more about this later, I assume, but a third party vote, abstaining from voting, doesn't get us closer to that reality. I think many people know that a Harris presidency would definitely be better for the left, for the working class, for marginalized people. I don't mean it will be good, but labor organizing with a friendlier NLRB will be better. My comrade from MUG mentioned UAW and UE. Both of their momentum would be set back under Trump. And generally in the current moment, like any socialist priorities, need Democratic legislators, a Democratic presidency to enact them, whether we're doing that from the inside or from the outside. So we as DSA need to respond to the 2024 election and the challenges of the oppressed and working classes with a hopeful but realistic vision of American politics. This means prepping for a spectrum of scenarios, but we should really be engaging with the reality here and trying to mitigate the worst outcomes of the fascist regime, but strategizing over what pressure points we can exploit if Kamala wins.
Thank you. Next is going to be Bread and Roses, so I will have Zev unmute.
I agree with a lot of what's been said. There are no good choices in this election. We are once again seeing a contest between a corporate Democratic candidate and a far right-wing or fascist Republican candidate. Working people, once again, are left without a party to call their own. And in this race, unlike 2016 and 2020, we don't have a socialist candidate we could have rallied behind. There was no one running on Medicare for all. There was no one running on the Green New Deal. So it has become more difficult for us to articulate these politics at this time. Meanwhile, working people are continuing to see inflation rise while their wages remain the same, and they're unable to pay for basic things like groceries. The Democrats are taking harder line positions on immigration, and the Biden and Harris administration are continuing to oversee a genocide in Gaza. Meanwhile, the working class still remains largely disorganized. Union density is still pretty historically low. So we need to ask ourselves a few questions of what course of action best serves the socialist movement at this moment, and what best serves the working class. So at this political moment, we need to stake out a politics of our own. We need to show that we offer a political alternative to those disaffected with the Democratic Party, particularly people who believe that what is happening in Gaza is unjust, Muslim communities, Latinx communities, young people, people who believe, and working class people who believe that there should be something better. We should continue to organize in our workplaces. We should continue to run candidates for office. And in each part of our political organizing, we need to be integrating our own politics and also our program, like Workers Deserve More. because we can show that a better world is possible and that we can provide a political alternative to both the Democratic and Republican parties.
Thank you. Next we'll have Red Star, so I'll have Allie unmute.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I just want to start by echoing the same things that my comrades in MUG and BNR have already said. We are witnessing right now, since October 7th, a massive upswell of people who are horrified and appalled at the sheer amount of violence, death, and destruction happening in Gaza and Palestine writ large, and the fact that the United States continues to send weapons, bombs, munitions over towards Israel, overseen by our Democratic president, Joe Biden. We have seen this upswell of organization in protesting for immigrants' rights. How has the Democratic Party responded to this upswell? It has responded with near complete contempt. Muslims have now been alienated. Immigrants have been alienated. Even constituencies that we would say we need to support our lesser evil in order to support for liberation, like trans people, like my own communities who I hold very, very dear. There is a dearth of transness at the DNC, no trans speakers, and all trans issues being made content neutral in terms of book bans without actually any discussion of what the content of these book bans are. The writing is on the wall for us, just like it has been on the wall for immigrants, just like it has been on the wall for Palestinians, just like it has been on the wall for every single community that the Democrats have spat on and alienated. This is what they do. They take in constituencies and ignore them, and instead focus on external organizations to do the job of organizing up those constituencies, while we are left continually getting poorer as things continue to cost more and as crises of capitalism continues to deepen. The Democrats are a driver of political alienation. All of the issues that I've mentioned are downstream of the fact that the working class does not see themselves in national politics. When Kamala and Trump are on stage at the debate, people do not see somebody that they see themselves represented in, and people are incentivized to check out. To respond to this, DSA needs to be a place of protagonism, where people are taught, number one, how to participate in democracy and how people are able to demonstrate their own power through organization by actively making changes in their workplaces, in their homes, in their communities, in their own systems of governments. Change your chapter, change your town, change your country, change the world. Do we want DSA to be that place where people are growing and we are taking in the disaffected and alienated, or do we instead just want to be a bridge back to the traditionalist politics that have already spat on their faces? Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Groundwork, so I'll have Ben unmute.
Yeah, so the 2024 election presents really great risks for the working class, but also some opportunities for us to organize as DSA and cohere working class alignment. The far right and the possibility of a Trump presidency are a massive threat to DSA members, to all workers in the country and across the world, and to just marginalized communities everywhere. We can see it right now with the attempt to foment a pogrom against immigrants, with the genocidal policies towards trans people, that the results of a Trump presidency are literally life and death for many. But there are no good choices for workers in the United States, and especially for the international working class. There are only two people who can win the election, and there's no clear way to use our votes collectively to advance the socialist project. But there is widespread discontent and justified fear among the masses. So our task as socialists is that we must have an analysis that speaks to workers about why this is and what we can do about it. Existing working class organizations like labor unions and most groups that represent oppressed communities that will be targeted by a Trump administration support Harris. That makes sense for them. They have a duty to their members, but we're socialists first, however, and our project is different in that we have to point to a further horizon than just protecting the meager gains workers currently have. We have to create a mass constituency of the working class for itself, with socialism as the goal. We have to maintain a distinct political identity and perspective from liberalism or laborist social democracy, and we have to stand by our commitments to workers across the world, most notably right now in Palestine. That said, we have a tendency on the left toward insularity and toward flattening the difference between capitalists. Segments of capital have distinct interests. There are differences between bourgeois liberalism and outright reaction, massive differences, and we have to recognize those and use them to our advantage. This has been recognized by communists from Marx onward. One thing we should not do is downplay the threat of Trump and the fascist right. It's real, it's not overblown, and in fact, socialists are the only ones who can defeat the right. It requires a working class organized around class politics and solidarity. The question for the working class is how we can avoid being in a situation where every election is this apocalyptic struggle between morally bankrupt liberalism and incipient fascism. The staid politics of the Democratic Party are what got us here. Their inability to think ahead past the next election means they'll constantly be on the precipice. We have an actual analysis of the world. It's past, present, and future. And the only way to stop fascism is a mass movement of military workers. When we talk about the election, we have to reject the trap set for us of caring only about scrounging up enough votes to win this election and debasing ourselves in the process. That's not to say the winner isn't important. It's actually hugely important, unfortunately, or that we can opt out, but that we can offer an alternative for the future that will pull fascism up by its roots so every election doesn't have to be like this. Instead of just telling people to do nothing, to sit on the sidelines, we have to present some actual organizing for disillusioned people to plug into. We have to have a socialist perspective that presents an alternative and can cut through the fog of the election. So our strongest unifying message as socialists for the working class is build DSA so we never have to make a choice like this again. The only thing that can defeat fascism is socialism, and we have to choose solidarity. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Our last speaker for this question will be Judith, and since she didn't get a chance to introduce herself, I'll give her like an extra 45 seconds or so you can go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great. Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Judith, she, they pronouns. I'm a longtime member of YDSA at Florida International University in Miami DSA, recently became a member of Central County DSA. I'm also a member of Reform and Revolution Caucus, which is a revolutionary Marxist caucus. So our stance on the 2024 elections. Well, as a lot of people, a lot of the panelists have already said, we face a very difficult situation. And I think that the basis for coming up with a good solution and a good approach to this election is realizing that it's not going to provide easy solutions for us as socialists. We no longer have a Bernie type figure that allows DSA to grow passively the way that it has in the past. If we're going to grow into a political organ of and for the working class, we need to work for it. We need to show working people why DSA can be a political home for them and why it's their best shot at liberation. So I think really DSA needs to be ready for day one, whoever wins, with a concrete plan to build up a workers' party after the election. We need a long-term plan here. We have a difficult needle to thread, though. Our message does need to give a real, give real credence and real acknowledgement to people's fears about Donald Trump. And those are real fears, and there's a concrete acknowledgement that a Donald Trump presidency poses a grave threat from the far right. But the Dems obviously are leaving us with difficult choices here. They are carrying out the genocide in Palestine. And Democrats, as we've seen over the course of the Biden administration, really aren't able to provide a solution to Trumpism and to the growth of the far right. In fact, Trumpism is a reflection of Democratic policies over the last decade. The victory of the Democrats isn't a strategy to defeat fascism. The roots of the rise of the right are in the despair and demoralization that are sown by the Democratic Party over time. And if Kamala is elected, she won't pose genuine solutions to the rot of the capitalist system. That's going to, and so that's going to empower the right wing if we can't pose a genuine, effective alternative to them. This can't be accomplished immediately, but that doesn't mean we can't start now. Likewise, we have to admit that workers' consciousness is not in a great place for the left right now, but that doesn't mean that we can just give up. We don't have the numbers for political independence, but we can be the ones to build it. Right now, most workers will probably turn to Kamala Harris because they have illusions in what she will be and what she can be and what she will do for them, or because they're afraid of Donald Trump. This is understandable, but DSA's job is to convince people that Kamala Harris can't solve these crises, that only a socialist approach can. And so we need to be the ones to be able to prove that. So to beat the Republican Party permanently, we need to build up a fighting, campaigning organization that can coherently unify left opposition to both parties. We need to build up an alternative to the whole capitalist system if we hope to challenge its most reactionary parts. As R&R has consistently argued, having the Democrats in power over the last 4 years has posed the question very sharply. What is the distinction between DSA and the Biden administration and the Democratic Party? This year, we have a program, the Workers Deserve More program, that seeks to differentiate us from the Democrats that are running the country. We should use it. We should have a response that matches the scale of the problem, an effort building up from the chapter level, but being cohered and coordinated nationally, turning into a struggle at the level of high politics. This is why a campaigning focus on the Democrats' failures on policy and on Palestine and how they're strengthening the right is the approach that DSA should be taking here. Right now, with the Workers Deserve More program, we can be having chapter level town halls across the country where we're bringing together left organizations, members of our communities, working people, and unions into discussion about the need for political independence, about what we're doing to fight for that, and what our long-term vision is for a socialist society, and to actually be able to have these debates and discussions that are necessary to find a way forward together and to build the solidity of DSA and of the socialist left overall. So overall, we need to build the confidence and horizons of workers with a campaign and a program. Things can be better. Workers actually do deserve more. And I think that DSA is the organization best suited to be able to pose that. And so that should be our focus over the course of the electoral cycle and our long-term vision for building political independence in the years to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. Yep, so that is our first question. We had all our panelists go through. So we'll be starting with our second question with a different order of the panelists, just so we can have some variety. So our second question is, should DSA make a presidential endorsement? And if so, of who? Or a voting recommendation? Should DSA make a voting recommendation instead of a presidential endorsement? If you need me to repeat the question at any time, just let me know. And our first attendee that is speaking is Ben from Groundwork.
Yeah, so no, DSA should not positively endorse a presidential candidate. We haven't in a general election in many years, in fact. That's not our role in a contest like this. There are obviously a few clear reasons we shouldn't endorse Harris, as we didn't endorse Biden or Clinton or Obama. She's not a socialist, and her backing of the genocide in Gaza is immediately disqualifying for us. We can't positively campaign for that. We can't ask all of our members around the country to vote for that. We can plant a flag against fascism, though, and call to stop Trump. When DSA endorses voting a specific way, it's a collective action to exercise power. And in this case, we have a sort of impossible choice. There's no collective action we can take at the ballot box as a group that will result in an outcome that builds socialism itself. For our members, how to vote for president this time mostly works as an individual choice. There's no reason for us to be in the position of telling Palestinians, hey, you have to vote for somebody who's complicit in killing your families. That's just not something we should be doing. But similarly, there's no reason we should be telling trans members or anyone who may need an abortion or all sorts of other groups not to use their vote to protect themselves from persecution and potentially death, especially if we don't have an alternative to actually vote for. We're not going to form a consensus as an organization about who every individual member should vote for and in what circumstances. While we can reject a public endorsement of Harris out of hand, we should also reject calls for abstentionism en masse. Again, there's no collective action to be taken here that results in something actually good. The win scenario for DSA members and people who listen to us in choosing to vote against Harris or in an abstentionist way en masse is a Trump win. And the idea, I guess, is that this would require the Democrats to adjust their policy in the future. But beyond Trump winning, which is an abject disaster for everyone, there's no evidence that this stance would actually lead to our desired long-term goal here. Far more likely, if DSA called for everyone to vote against the Democrats, we would be blamed for a Trump win. It would crater our support among our base, who justifiably hate Trump. This has happened to every prior socialist effort based on this strategy. And if Harris wins after DSA calls for an abstention, the message is that our votes aren't even needed for Democrats to win, and we can be disregarded entirely. Instead, we have to campaign on the absence of a socialist alternative. We're stuck making this impossible decision because of a political crisis that can really only be resolved by building DSA. And we should honestly acknowledge in our messaging how difficult it is to sort out a clear plan. Trump is far worse, but the Biden administration's actions are so egregious, and yet third parties and abstentionism is a complete dead end. So if we emphasize how frustrating and impossible the situation is, most people will agree. We can't dodge the question of who to vote for. We need to be very concrete in our resolute opposition to Trump, but it's best to leave who to vote for up to individual DSA members depending on their circumstance, because there's no org-wide voting strategy that makes sense for everyone. I would actually point to the statement DSA made in the 2016 election, which laid out why we couldn't endorse Clinton while emphasizing the need to defeat Trump. First and foremost, we have to be honest about the situation and work from there. Thanks.
Thank you. And I forgot to give a warning, I gave it in the chat. I'll be giving a 30-second warning. I kind of let the panelists know, but it's always going to feel weird. So I apologize if I'm interrupting anyone's train of thought, but no worries. So yeah, our next panelist is going to be from Red Star. So I'll have Allie unmute.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So to answer the question of endorsement or voting recommendation, we must first answer the question, who is DSA's constituency? And there is a lot of support on this call and elsewhere saying that our support comes from the disaffected masses, from the people who, as I said earlier, the political system has already spat on and have already been disincentivized and pushed away. The people who, for lack of a better term, reject acceptance of the status quo. It is in our interest to campaign for their attention and to campaign against that feeling of powerlessness and has driven them into inactivity. These people, by and large, are not interested in being brought back into that traditionalist political system that disrespects them and marginalizes their participation. They are not interested in going back to engaging with an election in which they already know that they are not represented in, that they are not seeing. We stand to lose more by endorsing candidates or directing people how to vote in these systems that they actively are contemptuous of and don't care about them, and dedicating so much organizational energy there. We actually stand to lose that attention by going back into the same sort of lesser evilism politics and the same sort of unconvincing rhetoric to make this a referendum on whether or not we think Trump's leadership. Instead, DSA should lean into our politics, lean into our demands and our socialism, especially the demands at which the Democrats are not meeting and are not meeting in the moment, rather than trying to get people to try and participate in rigged systems that aren't protecting us anyway and try to become constituencies of a system that spins us off once we become politically inconvenient. In 2016, Bernie Sanders had massive influence. Why is that? Because he was an insurgent against the traditionalist politics of Hillary Clinton, because he didn't campaign directly against Republicans, even though that was part of his campaign, but this was a referendum on the failures of Democratic leadership. He staked out a position, even an imperfect one, to the left of the Democrats. The Bernie we have now, who goes on Meet the Press and praises Dick Cheney, who's adopted these same traditionalist politics for some last influence in the waning moments of his political career, doesn't have nearly the influence he once did. Why do we stop and turn back now when we have the chance to fill that void and build something actually socialist and that we can actually be proud of?
Thank you. I forgot to put about the warning, sorry. Okay, so our next attendant is Judith. So I'll have it.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess just to start off, no, we should not endorse Harris, and we shouldn't campaign for her under any circumstances. Kamala Harris has wholly adopted right-wing rhetoric on immigration. She is complicit in the genocide of the Biden administration and will continue the Biden administration's fundamental course if she wins the presidency. And I think importantly, Kamala Harris really has no platform. Kamala Harris's campaign may be inspiring false confidence in a lot of working people right now, and understandably so, but once she's actually in office, the actual coalition that she'll have for implementing any sort of policy is going to be extremely weak, and it's going to reproduce the sort of political crisis that we've been seeing, over the last few years that led to Trumpism. But again, we face a very difficult situation here. The question of the ballot box is where the contradictions of our current course and of the state of DSA are most visible. And it's understandably, it's the hardest question for us to answer right now. So I think in the immediate term, DSA should be running strong down ballot campaigns and cadre electoral candidates who will build DSA as an independent political force and can build up the sort of electoral base that allows us to really become competitive with an independent, strong fighting message that supports the campaigns that we're running on the basis of clear demands and an independent identity. None of the third party candidates running this year inspiring confidence in the working class. Cornel West's campaign has been a mess. Supporting Claudia de la Cruz would do more to build PSL than it would DSA, and doesn't present a clear popular solution for folks. And Joe Stein also is repeating a failed strategy of the Green Party that it's taken on election after election. Really, what DSA needs is that long-term vision. Part of being ready from day one for whoever is elected to the presidency this year is concretely knowing what we're going to do to never have to face this situation again. Working people are going to have to make a difficult choice at the ballot box, but DSA should be preparing to tell them that we're building an independent alternative that is going to give them another choice the next time the presidential election comes around. So yeah, I mean, I think really concretely what we should be doing is preparing to run a presidential candidate in 2028 and running down ballot campaigns in the meantime.
Thanks. Next is going to be Alex from LSC.
Yeah, so the question of should we make a presidential endorsement? I heavily fuck with Allie's assessment of our orientation to this election. We're going to lose credibility among the working class if we force them to engage in a system that we know is only going to further sideline our political goals through our engagement with it. We should make no pretenses that taking a political position on the presidency of this election is going to meaningfully advance our politics in any meaningful way. DSA is a large multi-tendency organization. We would not be having this forum today if it weren't for the fact that opinions differ widely on what our approach should be. And this only further outlines the disparity of opinions that we have in relationship to the election. This agreement is not only inter-caucus, but it's even intra-caucus. There are various groups within our own caucuses that have various opinions on who we should endorse or who we should vote for. Not only can we not agree on whether to vote for Kamala for harm reduction, not vote, vote abstain or vote third party, even the third party is sort of split on who to vote for this election. It's not to say that there's valid reasons for each of those decisions. I want to push back on Grace's statement on asceticism. People recognize the system is immoral and they're free to express their disapproval in whatever way is meaningful to them. And I think that's still valid regardless of what your feelings are about the candidates. But ultimately, there is zero chance of a socialist candidate being elected this year. A few socialists who I've seen speak on behalf of third-party presidencies kind of know this implicitly. Most of them talk about the presidency as, or voting for the president as like sending a message rather than changing the ultimate result. Of all the mainstream opinions that are being debated within DSA, no votes for genocide, the idea that we shouldn't be voting for Kamala Harris or any candidate who supports a genocide in Gaza. That was one of what I thought was the better choices out there, but ultimately it still fails to resolve the core issue of DSA treating the presidency like it's at all within our grasp to affect change. I also think for the same reason it would be a waste of our resources for DSA to invest a campaign anti-endorsing a candidate. Refusing to make an endorsement selection is not only a better use of our resources, but it will be less divisive for our organization on an issue that it's at its core unproductive for achieving our goals as socialists. I disagree with Ben's assessment that Democrats have a short-term electoral vision. They know their long-term vision. It's to oppose the working class and benefit corporations. They have to act clueless and incompetent because it just keeps the working class confused about their intentions and keeps people voting for them. So why do we as socialists fixate so hard on the presidency as a potential focus of our organizing?
30 seconds.
So I'll get to some of these statements I'm going to make in the moment, but I do want to say that I think we need to realize that our organizing is super cyclical because of electoral organizing, and we need other alternatives to direct our energy for us to actually deliver meaningful change.
Thank you. Our next panelist is going to be Grace from SMC.
Great, thank you. So I'll start by saying that I'm fairly confident that deep down, the vast majority of DSA members, including those on this panel, would prefer Harris to win over Trump. We might not always say it out loud, depending on where we are, but we know that one of those two people is going to win. And I sincerely hope that no DSA leaders actually prefer a fascist regime to even one that is anti-working class, but at the very least is not fascist. As socialists and as leaders of the left, I think we have a moral and a political duty to tell the truth about our political reality, both to ourselves and to those who look to us for leadership. So I think ideally, a DSA that is serious about grappling with and wielding power would have the clarity and unity to call for voters in swing states to vote for Harris. However, we are not that DSA in this moment. I think the DSA we aspire to grapples with those things and would be prepared to offer critical support for Harris, probably short of an endorsement. I also wouldn't be enthused about really putting a lot of resources into reelecting her, but we can do that while still being sharp and clear about her failings. We would make the case for blocking fascism while putting forward a positive vision about how socialists can gain enough power to actually create a political system that produces better alternatives than Harris. Completely sitting out this election is marginalizing, and that is effectively what we're doing. We're self-marginalizing. But ultimately, still, I think DSA should not make an endorsement because we cannot do so. This is sad but true about where our national organization is. We're abdicating that left leadership to other groups to our right, like the Working Families Party. And groups like WFP are joined by union partners who have specifically been called out by other panelists on this panel. So United Electrical, UAW, they're calling for blocking Trump presidency because they actually know that that would be better for their members. I'm particularly curious how panelists who claim that an endorsement of Harris would alienate the working class, what they would make of the unions who in fact have chosen one of the two sides in this presidential election. They've chosen Harris because they know that a Harris presidency is better for their organizing conditions and and creates a like safer and better United States for their members who have to like live their lives and don't want to do it under fascism. So ultimately, we won't make an endorsement because we can't, but I think we should try to build towards an org that is meaningful, that is like clear and has enough meaningful power that our endorsement matters and that we are brave enough to make one.
Thank you. Next is going to be Zev from BNR.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate where Grace left off because I think it opens up a lot of serious questions of not just like if we should endorse or if we should make a recommendation, but what it means if we don't do so. So obviously, I think we should not endorse supporting, or I don't think we should endorse Kamala Harris. She supports a genocide. She has taken on increasingly right-wing positions on immigration. However, we also recognize that we don't want Trump to win. That being said, our task is not to elect Kamala Harris. Our supporting her would essentially be liquidating our politics into the Democratic Party. When people look to a socialist organization and what a socialist organization should be, it should not be something that they cannot distinguish from the Democratic Party. It needs to be something that offers its own political horizon, its own political platform. I think a lot of people assume that by DSA cooperating with the Democratic Party, either like tactically or in like a more kind of like comprehensive way, we would essentially be like a junior partner to them. However, we would be gaining no concessions to make this happen. We wouldn't effectively be a junior partner. We would just be kind of like providing them with resources, and that actually wouldn't be building the power of the working class. So I don't think what we can do is we can't encourage people to vote for Kamala because of her stances on genocide, on immigration, against the working class. But also, I wouldn't feel comfortable telling working class people to not vote for Kamala because many people are tactically defending their own limited civil and democratic rights that they have. But this isn't to encourage like complete like abstentionism in the political process or self-marginalization. It is simply to say that our political task is to offer an alternative. We can show people that a better world is possible. We can tell people to help to build like democratic organizations, unions, become active in DSA, because our task is to build a socialist organization that can eventually provide an actual political alternative to the two major political parties.
Thank you. And finally, we're going to have Stephen from MUG finish off the question.
Yeah, so I think we can probably pretty broadly agree that it's a historic failure for DSA that we didn't have a candidate this year. It's kind of left us adrift in this immensely important moment in American history where we should be getting our politics out to millions of people. YDSA attempted to make an intervention in this regard with Rise Up for Rashida, resolution at our convention to try to draft Rashida Tlaib to contest the Democratic nomination after Biden dropped out. But this was more of a Hail Mary than a real strategy. And it was rendered a moot point anyway by the undemocratic machinery of the Democratic Party crowning Harris nominee without any kind of real contest. So we need to think about 2024 in terms of what is necessary to give us the best shot at not being in the situation again in 2028. We're not going to win in November, no matter what happens. 2024 is about 2028, and beyond that, the next 20 or 30 years of socialism in the United States. And as far as that goes, our first task is how do we cohere a base of working class people into an organization capable of challenging both major parties in 2028 and proving that an alternative kind of politics is possible. The first step is we need to, DSA needs to have a real political identity. Workers deserve more is a step in the right direction there. But that brings us to our second task, which is how do we fight for the demands in our program? A program needs to be more than just a list of things we say. It needs to be, first of all, a set of red lines that determine who and what we are as an organization, and two, a set of things that we actively fight for in a way that demonstrates to depoliticized, disorganized working class people that fighting for a better world isn't a hopeless endeavor. And Mug's proposal, no votes for genocide, mentioned earlier by my LSC comrade, achieves both at once. We first need to reach the disaffected millions with a clear message that identifies us as the political home for those who cannot justify giving legitimacy and a political mandate to the party of genocide. And we need to use every bit of leverage we have to fight for the demands that our workers deserve more program, of which an arms embargo to end the genocide in Palestine is currently the most urgent. One of our most powerful tools is our ability to leverage votes in swing states in what promises to be a close election. We have the opportunity and therefore the responsibility to make it clear to the Democrats that if they want to win, they're not going to be able to do so with a pro-genocide campaign that they're currently running. No votes for genocide isn't like a paper tiger. It doesn't just exist purely in the heads of our NPC members. There's a growing movement out in the wider world pursuing this kind of approach. Local formations of the uncommitted movement are taking that campaign to its logical conclusions by threatening to withhold votes without an arms embargo. We have uncommitted New Jersey and Listen to Wisconsin have already launched no votes for genocide style campaigns in their states. And there's autonomous campaigns popping up in Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, no doubt more as we get closer to the election. We at DSA have a choice. Are we going to step up and provide political leadership in this moment? Or are we going to trail behind it, tell disaffected voters and oppressed people that they're moving too fast and going too far? Are we going to open up our mass democratic organization to serve as a political home for the many thousands of people these campaigns will reach, or shut our doors to them through abstention or a de facto endorsement of the Biden-Harris regime? Are we going to combat hopelessness by bringing working people into struggle for our workers deserve more program, or allow that program to remain a sheet of paper while we tie our fortunes to a party that is hostile to us and every one of our core demands? These are positively existential questions for us, and no vote to genocide is the answer.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes this question. So we'll be starting our third question. I am getting a lot of questions in the chat, and currently we don't have a Q&A section scheduled, but if we have time, we might take some, but we'll consider that later. So yeah, our third question is going to be, what should DSA's response be to DSA endorsed candidates / members in office endorsing Biden or Harris? And our first attendee who's going to answer that question is Alex from LSC.
Yeah, so as socialists, we have to be unequivocally clear that endorsing Kamala Harris in this election is tantamount to endorsing genocide. Both politicians are pushing for a war in Gaza to continue, and both politicians are completely unshaken by the massive loss of life among the Palestinians that's being perpetrated by the Zionist entity. AOC has run to the right since her election, and we can't sacrifice the principles of our organization just because it would make us less popular to endorse her or to unendorse her. And so when she comes out and stumps for Biden or stumps for Harris at these events, we have to be absolutely clear that if a politician does this and they have DSA's endorsement, it's counter to our values as a socialist organization. If we are to chart a path forward for the working class, we need to put forward, like others have said, a meaningful alternative to the capitalist system. This cannot happen if we support politicians who pay lip service to the forces in our government that perpetuate capitalism. The Libertarian Socialist Caucus firmly believes that if we are to endorse candidates to represent the values of our multi-tendency organization, we cannot honor DSA's politics if we do not hold those politicians accountable to our organization's democratically decided platform. Furthermore, it's imperative that we vote on and pass MSR 12 for an anti-Zionist DSA in principle and praxis, to make it clear to both ourselves as members and to the candidates we endorse that we must not tolerate support for an entity seeking no less than the complete destruction of an entire race of people within its claimed borders. It should be unacceptable for us to endorse any candidate who runs counter to our vision as socialists, whether that means endorsing an entity or supporting an entity that perpetuates genocide, or even siding with capitalists on issues like rail strikes, where the workers are necessarily inhibited by the interests of the democratic administrations that they try to agitate. We have to be clear that if we are to elect socialist politicians, they have to be accountable. They have to have a connection with DSA's internal politics, and they have to be committed to the eventual goal of building a separate entity from the Democrats. And until that happens, we have to make sure that our vision is respected in the candidates that we elect for that purpose. DSA is not going to become a party unless we have candidates who are invested in that as a project. We cannot have candidates who go back to the Democratic Party for support or for clout and away from DSA's organizing. They have to be part and parcel with our struggle.
Thank you. Next is going to be Ben from Groundwork.
Yeah, so ideally, as a party-like formation, we could instruct our electeds on who to support, especially in moments like the presidential election, during which all other politics are subsumed and reoriented around the singular national event. So, you know, in a situation we have a socialist candidate running, we should be able to say, hey, everybody who's endorsed by DSA needs to be actively supporting this candidate. But the issue here is we don't have anything to tell people to vote for. We have nothing to instruct them to do. We don't have a collective stance on who to vote for that advances our goals. In fact, we explicitly voted that down at the last convention. Our electeds have to make a call based on their actual base in their districts, who they're accountable to. Some elected officials, like Rashida Tlaib, have taken a brave stance of independence. But we aren't in a place to expect or even want all of our elected officials to do that. What we can expect is for them to criticize Biden and Harris, to be truthful about the situation, not to whitewash the crimes committed by the administration and the party. But we have an actual measurable social base who elect these candidates looking for leadership. There are millions of people who vote for DSA candidates and look to DSA and our electeds for leadership. This is part of the reason of the success of the Uncommitted campaign, for example. There are already millions of people who, when we endorse something and support it, that will be reflected at the ballot box, and it's the same people consistently. You can see this in the election results, but they see through BS. If you tell them, you know, Trump and Biden are exactly the same, don't vote for either of them, they're both fascists, they're going to stop listening because that's just obviously not correct. It's a silly thing to say. DSA grew under Trump because we could credibly say we're against fascism, we're against the far right. We're the only thing that can credibly beat the far right. Liberals are unable to, but Workers United can. And this needs to continue to be our message because it's the truth and it's far more compelling than the sort of having our electeds be like, hey, don't vote, it doesn't matter. We can't be anything less than fully anti-Trump. We shouldn't be telling marginalized people that their rights don't matter to us, but instead demonstrating that they matter to us more than they do to the Democrats. And so our vote matters as a collective, but we have to have something to vote for. And when we don't have that on offer, we have to let people make their own assessments and focus on building DSA as the organizational alternative. Our electeds can vote how they want in the presidential election, as all members can. But what we must ask them to do as leaders is to present DSA as an alternative, to promote our 2024 program, Workers Deserve More, to promote people joining DSA, and to be just very clear on the situation and its stakes. But I don't think we can begrudge people for taking either stance.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Next is going to be Grace from SMC.
Thanks. Yeah, I largely agree with what Ben was saying. Candidates need to be able to adapt to their political circumstances. And honestly, in the vast majority of cases, this is probably going to mean endorsing Harris and working to block Trump. This is true in some safe blue states. For example, in New York, our candidates, I expect, will and should be promoting voting for Kamala Harris on the WFP line, which is necessary to maintain WFP status as a party in the state. Having WFP as a party is extremely beneficial to DSA's electoral project. So it is not only in the elected's interest, but it is in DSA in our larger party building effort to do this. In swing states, candidates should recognize that their work as legislators and any effort to win actual material improvements for their constituents is going to depend on having more Democratic legislators. Republicans simply do not pass our priorities. More votes for Harris in any state is likely going to mean more Democrats down ballot as well. And as Ben was saying, they need to be responsive to their constituents. I know there's a lot of talk about the working class being disaffected, but if we look at unions and actual voting patterns along along a variety of demographic lines, a lot of people are going to be voting for Harris, and one single state legislator speaking out against that is not going to change things. Overall, though, I really think we need to see voting and endorsements like chess moves, not love letters. These things are tactical maneuvers. We do them to get things that we want, not to express the truest parts of our identity. Like I was saying in my first answer, this shouldn't be about moralism. It should be about materialism and what we actually want to have done. If an endorsement of Harris will help our electeds and our movement achieve our goals, then that's a good thing, not a bad one. Especially if DSA is not taking a position here, our electeds should be leading. It's absurd to me to say that we should punish electeds when DSA is not going to take a position on this matter. Most people on this panel have basically said DSA should not take a position on this matter, but we're going to punish our electeds for taking a non-position. It just doesn't make sense. And I'll also go back to my question, what do people actually want to wake up to on November 6th? If that is not a Trump presidency, why on earth would we not want our electeds to be leading on this, especially when DSA can and will not do so? If that's what we want to see, we should be encouraging our electeds to be voices, to become more prominent, to offer a socialist alternative to Democrats while also fighting fascism.
Thanks. Next is going to be Judith from R&R.
Yeah, so I think that with this question around whether DSA endorsed candidates and representatives should be endorsing Kamala, or what our response should be if they do that, points to the really strong contradictions that have existed in DSA's electoral program for years now. While large sections of DSA have been committed to things like the dirty break, we really haven't been effective enough in actually envisioning what that means concretely and in actually putting it into practice. So socialist electeds shouldn't endorse her. But I think that the reality is that socialist electeds will endorse her until DSA begins taking concrete steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. I think that we should be willing to tactically use conditional endorsements and critical support for candidates and electoral representatives as a way to set forward an independent left politics in a way that can be educational and involves more people within DSA as well as the people affected by these electoral politics to actually have democratic debates and discussions around issues like this. I think ideally we want to begin winning people over from the Democratic Party over to a workers' party and to DSA. And to be able to do this, I think we need to be very clear about where we stand about how we differentiate ourselves. But we also can't have illusions that the types of candidates who will represent this independent politics are just readily available or already exist, right? Every member of the squad has voted to send arms to Ukraine and extend NATO, which is just as much a break from that independence as endorsing Kamala Harris is. So I think that the reality for us right now is that left caucuses in DSA, including R&R, have a responsibility to prove that a different type of electoral candidate and electoral strategy, one whose commitment is to the socialist movement writ large, can actually win, and that a party's strategy isn't just more principled, but also more effective. This is quite difficult, but if we actually hope to build an independent party, then it's the necessary precondition for doing that. We need to show in practice what it means to have that type of party, to build it from the ground up, and to set the groundwork for that. there
30
is a
seconds.
membership majority in my estimation within DSA for political independence yet, but we can help build one. Every time a more principled partyist electoral strategy has been presented at the DSA convention, the percentages of support for that have gone up. But again, I think we need to really build in confidence, not only in the wider working class, but even in our own membership, that things can be different in our electoral strategy. So I think that we need a lively and vibrant democratic culture that's capable of changing people's desires at a time where the Democratic Party is beginning to fortify itself and mislead those desires for a better world. So yeah, I mean, I think we need electoral conditions, but I think also just concretely, we need a positive vision. We need a positive alternative. We need to show people that it's possible, and we need to show them it's possible by doing it. And that means running principled partyist candidates who won't endorse Kamala Harris, and it can win.
Thank you. So next is going to be Stephen from Mug.
Yeah, so this problem is a symptom of our lack of a national level electoral project that primarily serves DSA's political goals. Former endorsees like AOC and Sanders have become fully fledged appendages of the Harris campaign, and as a result, they've ceased to be oppositional forces in any way. To the extent that we've disentangled ourselves from these figures, I think we should be grateful for that, because this could only serve to be a stain on DSA's legitimacy. But then even in the case of elections like Cori Bush, who's one of our most militant national electeds, leader in the Ceasefire Now fight, she immediately endorsed Harris upon Biden dropping out in the face of a close race, which she unfortunately went on to lose. We're fortunate that Rashida Tlaib has continued to take an oppositional stance to the Biden-Harris admin on this issue. But as far as DSA is concerned, this has effectively been by accident, being represented on the national stage by people who align with our political priorities by accident because they happen to have good politics independent of DSA's ability to exercise influence over them, won't cut it in the long term. The big ticket item here, the $1 million question, is how do we get to a point where we're electing people who represent our politics because they are cadre, because they think of themselves as DSA members first and elected officials second. We're a long way off from this. That work starts in municipal and state races, which we've made promising gains in lately, electing DSA cadre to state houses and city councils, from Louisville to Connecticut. And let's see, the most important thing we can do right now, though, to advance those strides and to get closer to national level political independence and a partyist electoral project is to start setting clear red lines and to make it clear who and what we are as DSA. If we want our electeds to take a certain position, as I think Grace was getting at, we as DSA need to take a position. And I'm of the opinion that that position must be no votes for genocide. We're defined by what we will and won't tolerate our name being attached to. I don't think our name should be attached to a modern Holocaust in Palestine. I don't think it should be attached to a regime of border walls and mass deportations or police and legal repression of students and workers resisting genocide. I think if we want to survive as a socialist political project, we can't afford for that to happen. And any elected official willing to lend their name to that in exchange for status within the party guilty of those things is no asset to DSA's political project and does not belong in our big tent. Check.
Thank you. Okay, so next is going to be Allie from Red Star.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So I want to clarify this question we ask. When we're talking about endorsements of Biden or Harris from members in office, are we talking about Biden and Harris as personalities in terms of their mass appeal or their electability, their debate performances, or so on? Or is it about their policies? Is the crisis with Biden really his policies, or was it, as it appears to be for so much of the Democratic Party, that he was merely unelectable? Because when I see Kamala Harris, I don't see the personality. I see someone who's okay with more bombs to Israel, someone who favors more violence against migrants at the border. I see someone who favors environmental destruction for the sake of fossil fuels, for someone who does not favor even basic economic reform such as Medicare for all or student debt relief. That is who I see. I see her policies, and I see them not only wildly out of step with what DSA is building, but what DSA is actively fighting for. So when an elected member endorses Biden or Harris, and they are strongly connected to DSA, I want them to first ask, do they know that they're putting these policies on our lips? Do they know that they are giving voice to these policies, which we are actively struggling against? Do they understand that that is the case? And this is particularly why AOC's full-throated support for Biden and Harris is a bad thing. Her association with DSA means that these policies that Harris and Biden have put on their campaign as central planks now get associated to us, whether we support them or not. And that means we are put in the uncomfortable position of having to answer for them despite fighting against them, because this association is made. DSA's democratic structures are resolute. We, especially in Red Star, highly value participating in those structures and actually engaging in democracy. And we see no value of shielding members, even elected members, from these processes so we can protect Democrats who see our endorsement as purely perfunctory. If they truly are in such a bind and playing a political reality of a Washington insider, then come and defend that to us. Come and make that reality known, because we have these democratic structures for a reason. Do they understand? So when disendorsements happen, we need to first ask, do they think that whether or not, if we endorse Biden or Harris, are they endorsing the policies they stand on and not just some media personality? And do we want those politics voiced by someone in service of our org and connecting it to our organization?
Thank you. And finally, to finish off this question, we have Zev from BNR.
Yeah, so when we're dealing with this question of what to do when our electeds, endorse Kamala Harris for president, we kind of have to recognize the bind that we're in currently as an organization. I think all of us on this panel have our, negative opinions about Kamala Harris. But then what Grace said is also true, that many of them will probably orient themselves towards Kamala Harris to reflect their local conditions. However, I do also think this speaks to something that has been mentioned a few times, which is our lack of ability to articulate what the party infrastructure for our elected officials will look like. We've moved closer in this direction in the 2023 convention when we passed Act Like a Party, where we tried to build out a more distinct political identity for our elected officials. Because what they say, no matter if they're a city council person or a state legislator, is important, because no matter what their elected office is, people will look to them as a spokesperson for the socialist movement. And while we may not be ready to act in a punitive way towards endorsing Kamala Harris, I do think we should be equipping them with the resources to take positions that are for democratic socialism, that are advocating for a political alternative, that are critiquing the Democratic Party and its failure to act as a bulwark against the far right. One of the core purposes of Workers Deserve More has actually been to be a resource for our elected officials, because programmatic unity should include our elected officials. They should not be held at a distance to our membership. They should be included in our membership when it comes to deliberation about the 2024 election, about political independence, about all of the political questions that we're thinking about. And in drawing them closer to these debates about our political moment and drawing them closer to this idea of programmatic unity, I think it's more likely that we'll be able to hold our elected officials to promote our political line, to build the independent political identity of democratic socialism and DSA without either feeling like they must tacitly support Kamala Harris in such a way that's overly deferential, or that's an inevitability and we'll have to use this red line. I think we can proactively bring them in closer to our politics.
Thank you so much. Okay, that concludes our third question. So we're moving into our fourth and final question before our closing statements. So this question is, should DSA form an independent party? If so, how should we go about doing so? And as always, if you need me to repeat the question, just let me know. And we're going to first start with Grace from the Socialist Majority Caucus.
Thanks. So this question, these words, independent party, comes up a lot, but I don't think that most of us are really clear on what they mean by it, and we're frequently talking past each other. So I think people either mean that we should have our own ballot line, or that we should build a powerful organization that includes elected officials and has a centralized structure. If we mean the former, the ballot line, I don't really think we should be trying to do that in the near or medium term. It has failed over and over and over and over and over again in the US. The Green Party is not a success, and I have no desire to be like them. In cases where it's been marginally successful, like in New York State with the Working Families Party, the party has to make calculations and compromises that DSA should never want to make. The WFP has to get a certain percentage of gubernatorial and presidential votes every year those come up, meaning they have to campaign for candidates regardless of political context. They campaigned for Andrew Cuomo before. They campaigned for Kathy Hochul. We don't have to do that because we are not a party. Additionally, a ballot line is merely a tool and anyone can run on it. The Democrats don't actually want socialists running on their ballot line, but they cannot stop us. If we had our own line, we also couldn't stop people running on it, and that could become a problem. However, if we mean the latter, so that we want to build a powerful organization that includes elected officials and has a centralized structure, we're actually already doing this, and we should continue to do so. I'm going to focus on the New York and New York City socialist machine because it's the one I'm the most familiar with and I think is probably the most developed. But we have 11 elected officials, 2 in city council, 9 in the state legislature. They meet weekly. They are part of a committee structure that has democratic voting alongside many elected and appointed members of the chapter. And we try to move coherently and share strategy as much as possible. It doesn't work perfectly. It's honestly only a couple of years old, but like that is a party, basically. We also have social infrastructure. New York City DSA is a pole of left politics in the city. And I think this system is replicable across the country in many other circumstances. The problem really is that the current political system in the US doesn't really have a legal recognition for what we're building. So unlike in Europe, here a party is basically only a ballot line. If we want to change that and unlock access to the funds and the power available to official parties, we have to change the laws. And guess what? To do that, we have to fight to gain power and influence. We have to kind of build the same type of party structure that we're building in New York City already. So we need more electeds, we need more allies, we need more people who are part of DSA who make us stronger. We don't get there by abstaining from elections of any sort. And I don't really think like fighting for our own ballot line right now gets us there either. We need to double down on what we've been doing and replicate what's worked in New York City to other chapters across the country.
Thank you. Next is going to be Stephen from Muck.
Yeah, so one thing I've heard a lot about in DSA is 2028. And with the push for a multi-union general strike coming out of the UAW, there very well could be a unique moment that year for DSA to field a candidate of our own, someone who genuinely represents our politics out in front of millions of voters through an agitational presence in the Democratic primaries that lives up to the promises of the dirty break model, and possibly even beyond that in the general election. But if we're going to get anywhere close to that, that work is going to need to start now, not in 2027 or 2028. I think our failure to run someone this year demonstrates the need for that kind of advanced planning. The last time DSA had a coherent national political project was in 2020 with the last Bernie Sanders campaign. Sanders, of course, surrendered that energy and the resources of that movement to the Biden campaign and ultimately the Biden regime that is now carrying out genocide abroad, repression of workers, and mass ethnic cleansing style immigration policy at home, and running full tilt into apocalyptic ecocidal policies. After the collapse of the Bernie 2020 campaign came the most significant moment of rupture in American politics in 50 years. The George Floyd uprisings, where 15, maybe 20 million people were out in the streets, coalescing around demands for an end to police terror, liberation for Black Americans and other oppressed groups, and defunding or abolishing the police in the midst of a radicalizing pandemic and hand in hand with an upsurge in popular anti-fascism. People were shooting back at the cops, for fuck's sake, and it ultimately went nowhere. In the hands of Democrats, police funding and militarization increased massively. Popular energies evaporated, the rupture healed. COVID went on to kill another million people, and much of Trump's platform came to pass under the Biden admin without anywhere near the same level of unrest. And where was DSA during all of this? We were even larger then than we are today. If any organization was going to step into the vacuum of leadership left by liberal NGO dead ends like the National Black Lives Matter organization, it was us, the only mass democratic, mass membership socialist organization in the country, with chapters in nearly every state and more members than any other organization on the far left by an order of magnitude. And we failed to do so. That failure has conditioned the last 4 years of political listlessness that DSA has suffered from. Our years lost in the wilderness pursuing pressure campaigns for dead-end reforms like the Green New Deal, the PRO Act, failing to put our oppositional foot forward as Biden converged on the politics of the first Trump administration. I would argue that all of this is downstream of the fact that there was a mass of millions of people looking for a political alternative in 2020, an alternative that would be ready and willing to fight independently of the Democrats and Republicans for a program of abolition, for a program of liberation, and we were AWOL as an organization. I think we're in a similar moment now. There's an organic movement of people irreparably alienated from a Democratic Party that supports unlimited genocide abroad and repressive policies at home. They're converging on a position of no votes for genocide or withholding our voting power until we get an arms embargo to end the genocide in Palestine. And we desperately need to not be AWOL again if we're going to set up the kind of organization that can rise to the challenge of 2028 in this moment that we're looking ahead to with the general strike and the possibility of challenging the national political project of the capitalist class in reaction for the first time in 8 years. So no votes for genocide if you want to run someone who can cohere a national political party in 2028.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, our next panelist on this question is going to be Zev from BNR.
So I think it's critical that DSA eventually form an independent party, whether it's a workers' party or a democratic socialist workers' party. I think this is essential because when people engage with politics, Sarji, they think about the political parties or they think about how they would identify themselves. And currently, neither party works for them. The Democratic Party in particularly, which we contest through, is one that represents both the workers and the bosses, the tenants and the landlords. These are irreconcilable contradictions that we need to work past if we eventually want workers to be in a party that they view can be their own, that they believe can be a vehicle for their own liberation. And so when we talk about this, this starts at the ballot box with its own party. We need to use our campaigns to actually refer to candidates as democratic socialists. That will be the first step in building the identity of a democratic socialist party. It's essential that we do this to cohere people. And eventually, and very soon, we should start experiment with running people as third-party candidates at the local and state legislative level. This will be an opportunity to experiment with new tactics that we haven't tried before in order to raise expectations, in order to raise the level of working class self-organization, and to show that there is an alternative to the Democratic Party. That starts very locally. You know, we contest a lot of elections, and we don't win a lot of them, honestly. We sometimes lose elections, and it's actually fine to intentionally run in an election where we know it's very likely we'll lose if we believe it can win power in the long term. We should also work in the state where our electeds should block together. We should be very open about what Democratic Party leadership is saying to our electeds and relay that to our members and to the general public. Oftentimes people will not want to do this because they might face retaliation from Democratic Party leaders. However, the most important thing that we can do as our socialists in office is to expose what's happening in the state legislature, to organize constituents, and to raise expectations. That's how we increase the self-organization and class consciousness of the working class. And then we also need to work within unions and work with unions. The rank and file strategy isn't just getting a job in a union, it's creating or recreating the historic link between the workers' movement and the socialist movement. So figuring out how we can get active in our unions, how we can bring major unions into building a workers' party or a socialist party, that will be essential to developing the vehicle that we need to transform society.
Thank you. Next on this question, we're going to have Ben from Groundwork.
Yeah, so should DSA be an independent party in the sense, meaning a group with membership, a program, democratic structures that nominates and runs candidates for office? Absolutely. But should we revert to the doomed strategy of running third-party protest candidates right now without a base big enough to win and contest for power? Absolutely not. With some hiccups, the fact of the matter is DSA's electoral strategy since 2017 has been by orders of magnitude the most successful electoral intervention by socialists in this country in over a century, if not ever. It's easy to forget just how marginal the left was before 2016. And our strategy was a break from both the realignment strategy of supporting progressive Democrats across the board and the abject failure of the protest candidate strategy. DSA intervening in Democratic primaries with the confrontational class struggle message has created new socialists in large numbers since the first Bernie campaign. It's allowed us to win elections and become the second force, the primary opposition to and the named enemy of the Democratic establishment in many cities across the country. As time has gone on and this process has been slow, it's easy to grasp around and look for a shortcut, but we know this isn't going to work. There isn't a button you can smash for class independence. We have to do it by continuing the sort of painstaking work we have been doing, even in the current headwinds, rather than blowing it up and starting from scratch. There's this idea we've heard from Red Star and Mug that there's this massive millions of people who love socialism but just don't vote and because they reject the two-party system. And it's easy to say this because it's essentially unfalsifiable, but it's just not true. We can measure what people think. We can measure our base. We can measure our strategies. I worked on the Bernie 2020 campaign in data, and I can tell you that for an unfortunate fact, staking out radical positions does not activate people who don't vote or pay attention to politics in large numbers. It just doesn't, unfortunately. It's easy to believe that it's nice to believe that all we need to do is agitate people and they'll be on board, but we have to do a deeper form of organizing. It's painstaking work over years. Right now, there are millions of people who support DSA. We know who they are and what they want, and we have to use that to expand our current base person to person rather than just staking out this radical propagandistic idea and hoping that these like mythical people will come and join us. So yeah, we should build up a party structure.
Thank you. Okay, next on our list for this question is Alex from Libertarian Socialist Caucus.
Yeah, so to get to the question of should DSA form a party, we first have to address the question of what should a DSA party do. To answer Grace's point, I do think that DSA should take an approach that is based more in how it organizes and align itself politically than by running explicitly on a ballot line. I think that's an important distinction to make. And I don't think Zev's suggestion of starting at the ballot box in building an independent party is going to move the needle on what we can actually achieve through the mass organizing that defines what our organization is capable of in the present. I disagree with Grace's earlier suggestion of our organizing needing to involve supporting third parties like the WFP and the Green Party amidst ballot access laws. It's an endorsement of those kinds of provisions to kowtow to them and thereby give them legitimacy. We have to rethink our approach entirely rather than stepping on rakes that we all know capitalists have explicitly set up to stop us. Judith said earlier that we don't have an organizing model beyond the Bernie tide that characterized DSA's massive growth and membership in the 2010s. I agree. I think this is predominantly the fault of how our approach to organizing through elections is extremely cyclical and only focused on elections and dies out as soon as elections are over. If we are to create a party model for organizing, elections should not take the center stage, but it should be a wing of our organizing rather than the center point. Running for campaigns for political office is not only highly cyclical and dependent on media coverage, it's not sustainable for an organizing model that is driven by membership. To build a sustainable body of organizing, we need to make DSA well known for approaches outside of electoral politics that actually deliver wins for the working class that outpace what they might receive or what they feel they might receive from the two major parties. I agree with Ben that our work should engage people directly, and it should do that outside of electoral ends rather than primarily within them. And I mean, even within the electoral framework, we still have pushed meaningful stuff outside of what candidates have delivered. I was organizing with Raise the Wage Renton, where we delivered a $21 an hour minimum wage. Politicians didn't do that. I helped deliver I-135 and am currently working on delivering I-137 to open public housing for Seattle. That didn't happen through politicians. Politicians have opposed those things. Tacoma for All is currently facing challenges from politicians in Tacoma. To create a strong DSA party, we have to tune our own conception of what a party is through that organizing model, and also influence the understanding of the American people toward our organization as a body for socialist agitation rather than electing politicians. If we keep our understanding of politics tethered to only what is possible from the standpoint of electing politicians, we should ask ourselves how much we're hamstringing ourselves in relation to what we can actually achieve for working people.
Thank you. Next we have Ali from Red Star.
Thank you for that. I love this question. I love this question so much, mostly because it brings me back to when in 1850, Karl Marx gave a speech to the Communist League where he said that trying to dissolve themselves into liberal and reformist democratic forces and democratic structures during the revolution in 1848 and 1849 in Germany was an abject mistake, and talking about the ways that the Communist League actively marginalized themselves by trying to put themselves into traditionalist politics. He calls multiple times throughout the speech for working class independence and defines explicitly what that is and says what a workers' party is and should does. This is coming from the Mensch itself, and I think it's as true today as it was in 1850. The fact is, the parties that we are expecting to stop an ascendant fascist right are not capable and equipped for this. We do not think that the Democrats represent a coherent alternative to an ascendant fascist right. And the amount of people we see who are disengaging from politics, who are in the millions, do not see this as well. And it is up to us to have that workers' party and to provide that alternative. Look from the last debate about Harris's rhetoric on fracking, Israel immigration, and her touting of endorsements from Bush administration officials. The insistence is, I am just like a traditionalist GOP. Our independent party must be focused around breaking this cycle and be a force whenever we can to struggle against fascism and the capitalist right. And understanding that that capitalist right still includes much, if not the entirety of the Democratic Party. And in terms of just sticking to the ballot box, that was never something that any socialist or workers' party has ever been able to accomplish. Wasn't true for the Bolsheviks in the 1910s. It wasn't true about Cuban revolutionaries. It wasn't true in Vietnam. It wasn't true in any place where socialism has had any degree of success. DSA, unlike the third parties that our comrades have cited as failures, offers something different, a place to practice democracy and to see it in action on the small scale. From our chapters and our national committees, it is a place where we can deliberate with each other to change society and the conditions we face. All of us in the organization need to buy into DSA, to our national organization, and make the democratic struggle together to make this happen. We need to bring our perspectives and our work if we're going to be able to persuade ourselves and our comrades. We do not give up when our positions don't win the day, but we work together to implement our collectively decided actions and programs. DSA never stops. We don't stop at one election cycle or seat. We're going all the way on this.
Thank you so much, Ali. Next and finally, for our last question before closing statements is going to be Judith from R&R.
Yeah, so I guess to begin, building an independent party is one of the most difficult things that we as DSA can do, and in my view, should do. And so it's important to be sober about how far we still are from actually accomplishing this. A year into the current NPC term, we're no closer to building DSA into a party than we were in the previous term. This fact has been more demobilizing than I think any of us would have wanted. But to change that, we need a participatory and democratic structure, which makes these debates around building DSA into a party actually matter. We need member forums that bring a mass of DSA members into democratic debate and discussion that helps them learn more about the issues and helps them really actually think about what DSA's future can be and should be. We need party-like model resolutions from the NPC that chapters can discuss and debate and implement in order to begin actually presenting a concrete vision for what a party-like structure looks like. We need a 2025 DSA convention that isn't just for rubber stamping resolutions, but actually deliberating on the contentious and important questions that obviously exist in our organization that come up all the time. I've written elsewhere that we can't trick people into building the alternative, nor can we force them into it. We must prove its necessity through struggle. And there are so many things that we can be doing right now to begin modeling this. We should be urgently preparing a dynamic and agitational socialist state of federal, state, and local candidates in 2026 and 2028, including in 2028 a presidential candidate that can represent us and show our politics to millions of people. We should be aiming to build parties and party-like structures in big cities that have nonpartisan races. And we should have a group of people or a committee tasked with helping chapters develop a plan for these types of party-like structures at the local level. DSA should be trying to organize for a national conference with other left formations and have a broad discussion amongst socialists broadly around how we can form our own party, about what it would actually take, about how we can actually cohere a broader left movement for independence. We should be having town halls hosted by DSA chapters across the country with the Workers Deserve More program, showing people what we actually stand for and how we plan to fight for it. We should be getting national rallies on January 21st for the inauguration. We should be having left caucuses working together and agreeing on a path to run candidates and collaborate. There are things that we need to answer. There are goals for how many cities we want to run for independent races, plans for actually implementing the dirty break, so much that we have unanswered. But there's also so many things that we can begin doing. We can begin fighting for a party now, but it requires a clear vision for what it takes and practical coordination to make it possible. That requires all of us.
Thank you so much, Judith. And that is the end of our questions for this panel. So we're now going to move into closing statements. So we have it set for about 2 minutes for each attendee. So our first person doing closing statements is going to be Stephen from Marxist Union Group.
Yeah, I want to use my closing statement to push back on something I heard Comrade Ben say. The idea that the permanently disaffected workers and youth who DSA will lose if we surrender to the hopelessness of lesser evilism are somehow imaginary or a fiction. I know they're not imaginary because they're my comrades being tear gassed and beaten on their campuses for opposing genocide in democratic-controlled cities, democratic-controlled states under a democratic presidency. I know they're not imaginary because they're the Muslim and Arab voters at rallies, even down here in the Deep South, affirming we'll remember in November. What right do we have to look these people in the eye and tell them we're not going to bother mounting a serious opposition in 2024? What right do we have to go to them and affirm that they are powerless, that to leverage their votes for an end to the genocide is worthless, and that they'd better settle for the lesser of two genocide heirs? That's not an organization I want to be a part of. However, I'm proud to be in leadership of YDSA and active in DSA because I know we are and can continue to be more than that. But we have to actually go out and do it. Those voters aren't imaginary, but what is imaginary right now is our Workers Deserve More program. As great as it is, it's useless as long as it's just a list of things we like to talk about. Are we going to fight for it or not? Do we want to use everything at our disposal to win a ceasefire or not? The NPC today voted down no votes for genocide at the national level, but the moment to seize this opportunity has not passed. YDSA passed no votes for genocide nationally back at our convention in July, and we can pass it in our own chapters as DSA. We can join the organic movement emerging in swing states and elsewhere to leverage our votes for an end to the genocide and build a real political home that can serve as alternative to the two-party genocidal system, or we can choose not to. And I think DSA, it's a clear choice between those two. That's all I have to say. No votes for genocide.
So I want to remind everyone what happened when DSA took control of the Nevada Democratic Party. DSA organized a campaign to take positions of leadership and win over the party from capitalist control. And they succeeded. What happened? The party took their toys away and left. They left, they split up, they set up an independent group with all the capital, all the resources that otherwise would have gone to the party. When we delivered the Build Public Renewables Act in New York, it got buried by Kathy Hochul, and it didn't achieve the result that we wanted. Our approach to politics needs to organize with the fundamental opposition of the current system in mind. We cannot break out of this system by continuing to play by its rules. I want to address something that I've heard a lot in DSA discourse, and that's the question of winning. To some in DSA, winning is when DSA elects a politician, begins and ends at when DSA elects a politician. It does not begin and end at where DSA actually delivers a victory for the working class, something they can point to and say, DSA did that for me. And DSA is the reason why I have food on the table, or a place to live in, or a living wage. We need to phrase our question of how DSA wins in relation to that, not in relation to who DSA elects. Until we have the conceptualization of org building and movement building intertwined with our projects, we're going to continue to either elect politicians that are controversial within our organization or pursue avenues that are dead on arrival on moving the needle for working people. We need to build our organization as we organize. We cannot cannibalize our organization to achieve an electoral project. We need to be responsible to ourselves and each other and to the democratic model of DSA if we want this organization to be sustainable. If you want to fight to achieve a vision for DSA that incorporates the needs of the working class in our struggle, please join LSC. It's dsa-lsc.org/join. We would love to have you as part of our struggle.
Thank you, Alex. And next for closing statement is going to be Ben from Groundwork.
Yeah, so thanks for having this panel. It's incredibly important that we have this debate, a real serious debate about our present political moment and what our analysis and orientation should be as socialists. I think we all agree on building DSA as an independent party-like structure for a mass structure for the working class. We disagree on what our orientation to the state is and the central question right now. So for me, the central question we're here to answer just on this panel as socialists is, what is our message and who are we talking to? Is our message, liberals are unable to defeat fascism, only socialists can join DSA and build an alternative to fight the far right? Or is our message, liberals are fascists, they're the same, join DSA and fight back? The first one is correct analytically and morally. And the other thing is, our base can see through lazy phrase mongering. When you tell them things like this, like Trump and Harris are the same, don't vote for either of them, things like this, they're going to stop listening because it's obviously not correct. Very, very few people view this as correct because it's just not. People will not join DSA if we're not in resolute opposition to the rising far right and to Donald Trump. And for good reason. We need to be out there protesting fascism and disrupting the far right, as we were when Trump was first elected. When I first joined DSA, we did things like we disrupted the Kristen Nielsen, the secretary that was overseeing ICE. We protested constantly against Trump, against deportations, against Muslim bans. That's what brings people to DSA. That's what defeats fascism. So we have to be very clear in our analysis. What can we do as a collective to advance working class power? What will make this more or less likely? Who are the people we need to reach? What do they think? Where do they live? It's easy for these debates to get lost in this sort of empty moralizing, but that's not politics. We have to reject the abstentionist era of the American left that left us in the wilderness for decades. The presidential election is important, and it's important to struggle for a coherent line. We can't endorse Harris, and we should be clear about why and what our alternative is, why workers need independent organization. But we also have to be very resolute in our opposition to Trump and fascism in the GOP and very clear about the world as it exists and the differences between them. If we aren't, we'll have burned our credibility to fight against Trump if he wins and to protect the people we need to protect if we end up in that situation. So thank you, and you can join Groundwork at our website, which is, I don't know, groundworkdsa.com. I don't have it on hand.
Thank you. I'm about to be putting all the websites in the chat for everyone. So next for closing statements is Allie from Red Star.
Thank you again. It is incumbent on us to be the alternative in all national politics that people are so desperately clamoring for, to be the voice that actually represents the working class there, and to win the disaffected people and turn them into socialists. It is important in order to win these people that we cannot just bring them back in traditionalist politics, who stabs them in the back and drops them at constituencies when they become politically inconvenient. Traditionalists accused Bernie in 2016 of ruining the election just because he presented that left alternative. And any left alternative that is truly a threat to the democratic model will get the same criticism. Why shy away from this opportunity if we're only going to normalize the terrible middle ground that we have now, or even partially normalize it? Why do we do the work of bringing constituencies back into a politics that will continue to marginalize them instead of building that alternative by participating deeper in DSA, by doing democracy, and by allowing people to make the changes where they can take action right now in their jobs, in their homes, in their local races? Why do we want to associate ourselves with this violent, regressive policies that Kamala Harris is standing on in service of an increasingly unconvincing lesser evilism? Now is the time for DSA to lead with our politics, to not shy away from who we are, what we demand, and radical as it is, in the face of liberal backlash, and be ready for that liberal backlash. We get nothing if we're not courageous and forward-facing with our politics. And we have to be able to make that alternative that is actually threatening to the systems that we have now. And finally, it is not enough to say that workers deserve more, but we must also demonstrate what it is that workers deserve more of.
Thank you so much. Next for closing statements is going to be Grace from Socialist Majority Caucus.
Thank you. So I want to start by saying that so some of my comrades on the panel have talked through wanting to create either a ballot line or really leaning into a completely oppositional electoral strategy, and that's how we'll make a party. But if that worked, the Green Party, PSL, many other totally failed to the extent that we've completely forgotten about them attempts at a third party model would have been successful. We would be in those groups. We wouldn't be in DSA, which is the largest socialist movement in the country for over a century, or for 50 years rather. We are building something that is halting and sometimes not always working exactly how we want it to, but that is a more successful model than people who have opted for a more oppositional or a third party model. I'm going to highlight New York again. In New York State and in New York City, through the work of people from many caucuses, many different political tendencies, we have built what is functionally a party. It isn't always perfect. And we don't always move exactly how we want to, but we're working towards it. And this is replicable. It kind of frustrates me sometimes when comrades talk about like there having been no work or we have to completely start from scratch on building towards a party when we actually have this huge block of socialists in New York, and there are other blocks and other chapters throughout the country that are caucusing together, that are strategizing together. We all say we want power, but we're actually like doing the work of grappling with what power means and the compromises that sometimes come with that. Some people hope that if we take the most moral position and don't actually make any of these compromises, don't actually grapple with having power, the pure force of our left morality will attract the groups who are left to us and also millions of disaffected Americans. But if that was going to work, it already would have. It would have now, it would have in the past. In New York and in other places, we're actually building something that's replicable that we can do in lots of other states and cities. And we're actually building power, and we're dealing with what comes with that. And that's the only way that we're actually going to see a democratic socialist future.
Thank you so much, Grace. Our next closing statement is going to be Zev from Bread and Roses.
So in this political moment, working class people in the US are faced with two awful choices: a corporate Democratic Party and a far-right conservative Republican Party. Our task is to provide a political alternative, but also to make sure that this never happens again, that we offer a socialist perspective on national politics. And we need to strive for working class self-emancipation. That is our goal as socialists. And for this, political independence needs to be our North Star. We need to get people to self-identify as workers, as part of a working class movement that can transform society. And so this happens when we show this political alternative, when we create an organization rooted in member democracy and a shared political program, that one that political office holders feel that they belong to, that they are invested in, and that they are carrying out the will of the members. So when we talk about building this party, it isn't just like this moralistic task. We're not running people as potentially as independents because we think that's the moral thing to do. We're not taking these positions because we think it's the moral thing to do. We're doing this because we think it wins power. We are going to be oppositional because that is how we organize the working class. We do it because when we try to win reforms, we don't get the reforms because we ask the Democratic Party nicely. We do it by winning and convincing the vast majority of the working class that they can actually win things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. We do this by using different tactics, by using different ballot lines, but ultimately by creating a workers' party and wresting control back to the working class.
Thank you so much. And finally, our last closing statement is going to be from Judith in R&R.
Yeah, I think that this has been a wonderful discussion between different tendencies and comrades, and I'm glad that we've had it. As I mentioned, the future won't be easy for us as DSA members to build, but we do have to build it. An independent party won't just work with DSA's base. We need thousands of working class people taking part in the political process and seeing themselves and their class interests reflected in and through DSA. They need to recognize DSA as a democratic political organ that can fight for their interests, that can lead them, and engage them in a revolutionary struggle. We need to actually win working class people over to socialist politics. We need to win them over to a socialist horizon. We need to show them that that's possible. And to do that, I think that we need to get the working class into fighting shape. And we need to do this by getting them real wins. This means having a campaigning approach that substantiates our principles as socialists, which makes DSA into a political home for hundreds of thousands of people and shows them that they too are capable of fighting and winning. Campaigns are really the best way for us as DSA to show what it means for to actually put socialist politics into practice. We need strong demands that point people beyond just the bare minimum, right? When we're fighting for a ceasefire, we also need to be fighting for an arms embargo. We need to be fighting for a free Palestine. We need to be fighting for the world. Beyond that, I think we also need to recognize that building a party doesn't just mean that we're independent, we have an independent ballot line. It also means that we have socialist institutions which are embedded in the day-to-day lives of the working class, and that working class people are engaging with regularly, that they view it as a part of their lives, as a part of who they are. That's the type of consciousness we want to build. That's the type of agency that we need in a mass base of people that are ready and willing to fight back against the capitalist system. I've said before that we need to be ready from day one after the election, no matter who's elected. But historically, we haven't really been great at that. DSA has scarcely been an organization which is ready for the challenges ahead of it. And that hasn't changed under the current NPC term. But we're in DSA for a reason, because it's the organization which has inspired so many of us to be part of the socialist movement, because it's the organization that has, after so long, cohered thousands of people together for a socialist project in a space where they can actually democratically decide the future of that project. Because DSA continues to be the organization that builds up our hope for a socialist world, and which actually makes it seem possible for us if we fight hard enough. We have a responsibility to be convincing to millions of working class people that have the ability to have class consciousness and agency and solidarity amongst each other and amongst the international working class. And DSA has an important role to play in that. But ultimately, that's a pretty new role for us, and we're still figuring out what that means. We need to do that and figure that out together through things like this, but also by building that project together. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Judith. And yeah, that concludes our closing statement period. I'll start a more formal closing of this forum. I really appreciate all of the attendees, like our entire caucus at Reform Revolution appreciates all the attendees accepting the acceptance of the invitation to this forum. We appreciate everyone spending their Sunday afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the States. And I'll say again, I did insert all of the caucuses websites if you want to learn more about every caucus in DSA, and possibly join them. And yeah, I really appreciate being able to moderate this panel. It's my first panel of moderating for our national DSA event. So thank you for having me. And if you're more interested in Reform Revolution, the organizer of this forum, I would encourage you to subscribe to our magazine. You don't have to be an R&R member to do that. So anyone is able to do that. And I have a recent article in our newest issue, so little plug there. Yeah, again, thank you so much to our audience. I hope you have learned more about the differing perspectives among DSA in the 2024 election. If you are a member of DSA, which I believe most of you are, we encourage you to keep organizing in your chapter, keep having these conversations about the election and how we should navigate towards it, and organizing this socialist alternative. And then also, if you're not a member of DSA, which we have a few folks in here, I would encourage you to join DSA. I would encourage you to join and help build this socialist alternative that we have been talking about for the past couple hours. So I definitely encourage you to join DSA if you're living in the US. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And we really appreciate you being here. So have a great night, comrades.